I never thought that coming home from the hospital would end with me locked out of my own house. The taxi driver didn't know where to put the bags, so he left them right there on the front porch, beside the potted hydrangeas I planted last spring, before the stroke, before everything fell apart. My cane tapped the concrete as I stepped forward, slower than I used to be. The air smelled like cut grass and something else, the bitter tang of varnish. My stomach twisted. The key didn't fit. I turned it again, then again, pressing harder, my knuckles whitening around the handle. The locks had been changed. I stood there, confused, checking the address as if I might have gone to the wrong place. But the blue shutters, the worn porch swing, the ceramic bird bath with the chip on one side, it was my house, my home for 42 years. I bent down to examine the door, my legs trembling slightly, when I heard the latch click from inside. It wasn't my son Darren who opened it, it was her, Melissa, his wife. Her lips pulled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned against the door frame like she owned the place. "Oh, Carol," she said, voice dripping with fake concern. "You're back earlier than expected." My mouth was dry. "The hospital discharged me this morning. What's going on with the locks?" Her smile widened. "Well, since this isn't your house anymore, we thought it was safer this way. You know, in case of confusion." "Confusion?" I blinked, heat rushing up my chest. "What are you talking about? This is my home. Darren knows I'm coming back today." "Darren's not here," she said, and glanced over her shoulder, clearly not planning to get him. "You should have called first. It's just awkward now." I gripped the railing to steady myself. "Let me in." Melissa crossed her arms. "I'm sorry, Carol, but legally, you have no right to enter. The deed's in Darren's name now, and since he's not here, I can't let you in." I could barely breathe. "My name wasn't on the deed?" "I didn't sell it," I whispered. Her eyes glittered. "You signed the transfer forms for tax reasons, remember?" "Temporary," you said. "You gave Darren power of attorney when you checked into recovery. It's all handled now. Easier for everyone." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I staggered back a step and caught myself on the porch rail. My luggage sat to the side like obedient dogs. 4 bags, a cane, and one old woman the neighborhood didn't recognize anymore. Across the street, Mrs. Nelson peeked through her curtains. Next door, the Robsons paused their lawn mowing. They were all watching. No one said a word. I clenched my jaw. "Call Darren. I want to hear this from him." "I told you," Melissa said sweetly. "He's not home. He's busy. And he asked me to handle this." The ache behind my ribs turned cold. It was clear now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, planned. While I was recovering from a stroke, they were taking everything. Melissa stepped back inside and began closing the door. "You can't stay here anymore, Carol. I'm sure there are options for people in your situation. Maybe one of those retirement places?" And then she shut the door in my face. Click. Deadbolt locked. I stood there for a long moment, the sun baking the back of my neck, the sounds of the street warping into a low buzz. A familiar street, a familiar house, but I was a stranger now. My name scraped off the mailbox. The locks changed, and no one to speak for me. My fingers tightened on the cane. If they wanted a quiet little woman to disappear, they chose the wrong one. 6 weeks earlier, I'd stood in the same doorway, cane in hand, suitcase packed by Melissa herself. She was so attentive back then. She and Darren had sat me down at the kitchen table, speaking in low, grave voices like they were doctors breaking bad news. "It's just a small stroke, Mom," Darren had said, resting his hand over mine. "But you need time, real rest. We found a good recovery center just 15 minutes from here." Melissa was already pulling up pictures on her iPad. Bright rooms, smiling staff. "The amenities are great," she'd said. "Private room, full meals, physical therapy on site. We don't want you stressing about bills or groceries right now." She made it sound like a gift. I didn't want to go, but my balance was off, and the tremor in my left hand hadn't stopped since I collapsed in the garden that morning. The doctors had said I needed quiet, structure, healing, And Darren, he looked at me with that soft, strained face I remembered from his boyhood, back when he was still mine, not hers. "Please, Mom," he said, "just until you feel stronger." I looked around my kitchen, the kettle still warm, the crossword unfinished by the sink, my home, my space, my rules. But I was tired and scared, so I agreed. I let them drive me there, let Melissa roll my suitcase behind me like a dutiful daughter. She even smiled when she left, like she was doing a good deed. "Rest up, we've got everything handled." Everything. The first week at the care center passed in a haze of medication and gentle voices. My body was slow, but my mind was still sharp. I kept a notebook on the side table, jotting down reminders, things to do when I got home. I called Darren every evening. He answered with cheerful updates. The cat was fine, the mail was being checked, the yard was mowed. "Melissa's taking care of everything," he'd say, again and again. And I believed him, because I wanted to. I told myself it was okay to lean on someone, just this once, just for now. On the 10th day, Melissa visited. She brought me a soft robe and my favorite tea biscuits. "Signed a few forms for me, Carol?" she asked as she pulled out a folder. "Just bank authorizations and one for the mail redirect. It'll make everything easier." I hesitated, but she looked so earnest, so patient. "You can revoke them any time," she added with a gentle laugh. "We just want to make sure nothing slips through the cracks." So I signed. My hands shook as I did, the pen wobbling between my fingers. "I'm glad we're doing this together," she said. Together. That word stuck with me. It felt good, in that moment, to be cared for, to be needed. Now 6 weeks later, I could see what I was really signing away. They hadn't taken care of me, they'd taken over. Piece by piece, while I was sleeping under white sheets in a quiet room with plastic flowers and a window facing a parking lot. And I let them. That was the part that hurt the most. At first, their calls came like clockwork. Mornings from Darren, evenings from Melissa. Brief, upbeat, always reassuring. "We checked the mail, Mom. Your garden's looking lovely. Don't worry, everything's under control." Every call ended the same way. "Rest. We've got this." So I rested. I tried. I watched the birds outside my window, counted my steps during therapy, made polite conversation with nurses and therapists who smiled too much. Every evening I'd sit in my room, clutching my phone like a lifeline, waiting to hear from them. Then, one Tuesday, the phone didn't ring. I thought nothing of it. Maybe they were busy. People have lives. But then Wednesday came, and Thursday. Still nothing. I checked my phone for service. I double-checked the call log. No missed calls. No texts. By Friday, that old itch of unease started to creep in. I tried calling Darren. Straight to voicemail. I left a message. Then, another. I told myself not to panic. They were just distracted. Something must have come up. But deep inside, something colder, something heavier had begun to settle. A feeling I couldn't quite name then, but that now I understand perfectly. Dismissal, like a painting covered with a sheet and shoved into the attic. I was out of sight now, tucked away, quiet, harmless, and they were forgetting me. The nurses noticed my mood shift. Janet, my roommate, offered to share her gossip magazines and chocolates. "You all right over there?" she asked one night. "I'm fine," I lied. But the silence was speaking louder than any phone call ever could. That Sunday, I sat by the window with my notebook open on my lap, a list of things to ask Darren forming on the page. Questions that suddenly mattered. Is the insurance still being paid? Did Melissa renew the HOA dues? Did they move the antique table like I asked? But the real question burned at the bottom of the list, underlined twice. Why haven't you called? I circled it hard, and I waited. That evening passed without a single word from either of them. The truth had started to simmer in the back of my mind. This wasn't about being busy. This was about being discarded. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the truth came in through someone else's phone. Janet, my roommate, had her iPad out, scrolling through social media like she always did while waiting for her evening pills. She chuckled, then nudged me. "Carol, look at this. You said your daughter-in-law's name is Melissa, right?" I looked up from my crossword. "Yes, why?" She turned the screen toward me. "Is this her? Decorating a place that looks a whole lot like yours." I took the tablet from her hands. At first, it didn't register. Melissa was posing in front of a freshly painted wall, holding up a swatch of wallpaper like she was on a home renovation show. There were paint cans on the floor, plastic covering the couch. She wore my gardening apron, my apron, with paint smeared across the pocket. But it was the background that made my breath catch. That was my kitchen. The same one Darren and I had spent years updating. I knew the shape of the cabinets, the scuffed floor tile near the fridge, the oak paneling I'd refused to paint over because real wood deserves to be seen. And now it was painted white. A pale, sterile white. I zoomed in. All the copper pots were gone. The rug I'd bought in 1992 from a street fair in Santa Fe, gone. A new modern light fixture hung where my hanging fern used to live. "That's my kitchen," I said slowly, my voice going small. Janet peered over my shoulder. "It's not tagged, but she must have posted it in a decorating group. Said they just upgraded their forever home." Forever home. My stomach twisted. That's what I used to call it too. I handed the iPad back, my hands trembling slightly. Janet tilted her head, eyes narrowing in that way people do when they've seen too much of life to be fooled. "Are they fixing it up for you to come home?" I didn't answer. Because I already knew the answer. No, this wasn't for me. This was never for me. They weren't preparing my return. They were erasing it. That night, I called Darren. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I didn't expect him to pick up, but part of me still hoped. Hoped maybe this was some misunderstanding. Maybe Melissa had posted without thinking. Maybe they forgot to tell me something important. Maybe. The beep sounded, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Hi, Darren." I saw a photo online. Melissa redecorating the house. My kitchen. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Just wondering, when I'm coming home. I miss my bed. Call me. I ended the call. The phone didn't ring back that night. Or the next morning. I called again. Voicemail again. Melissa said this was all temporary. I reminded him in message 2. "You said I could come home once I was strong enough. I've been walking on my own for 2 weeks now." I hung up and stared at the phone screen like it had betrayed me. Because silence, persistent, deliberate silence, isn't just empty space. It's an answer. One that makes your chest tighten and your thoughts spiral into places you swore you'd never visit. I didn't tell the nurses. I didn't tell Janet. I just waited. And when no call came, I left a 3rd message. This time my voice cracked, but I pushed through it. "I don't understand what's happening. Please, Darren, just call me." Still nothing. I sat by the window with the hospital blanket pulled over my legs, watching a squirrel chase a leaf across the sidewalk below. I couldn't stop thinking about that light fixture, the absence of the rug. The copper pans I'd hung with care now vanished like they never mattered. They were redoing the house like I had already died. And I was starting to wonder if that's what they were hoping for. It was Janet who finally said it out loud. We were having tea in the rec room, some forgettable game show playing in the background, when she looked at me over her cup and said, "Carol, you ever think maybe they don't want you to come back?" I blinked. "What?" She shrugged, casual in that painful way only truth can be. "You said the call stopped. Your son's not answering. Your daughter-in-law's redecorating. And your name's nowhere in those photos. People don't do that for company." I didn't answer. I just sipped my tea, but it tasted like dust. Janet leaned in. "I've seen it before. My sister, Lorna, her kids convinced her to move into assisted living. Said it was for her own good. Took her house, sold it 2 weeks later. She found out when her friend drove by and saw strangers moving in." I stared at her. "That's illegal," Janet raised a brow. "It's unethical. Doesn't mean it's illegal if you sign the wrong papers while you're weak." I sat with that for a long moment, and I remembered the folder Melissa handed me. The rushed tone, the faint edge of guilt behind her sugary words. "I thought it was just power of attorney," I said. Janet leaned back. "Honey, just power of attorney gives them access to your whole world if they want it. If you signed anything else, well, they might already own it all." I didn't respond because I couldn't, because the possibility wasn't just a hypothetical anymore. It was pressing in, squeezing the breath out of my chest. Later that night, I went back to my room and opened the drawer where I kept every letter, every card Darren had sent since I got sick. There were 5. Short, distant, polite. And then I opened my wallet and found the bank card. It used to work, now it had dust on it, and the weight of that little rectangle in my palm suddenly felt enormous. Janet's voice echoed in my mind. People don't do that for company. They were doing it for something else entirely, and I was starting to see what that was. I called the bank the next morning. The automated system didn't recognize my PIN. Not once. Not after I re-entered it slowly, carefully, the way I'd done for years. "Please hold for a representative," the voice said. The line clicked. A young man answered, chipper and polite. "How can I assist you today?" I gave my name, my account number, my security answers. All of it. Then I asked a simple question. "I'd like to check my balance." There was a pause, keys clicking in the background. Then, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this account is now restricted. It's accessible only by the designated representative on file." "What representative?" My throat tightened. "According to our records, Darren Keene. He was added 6 weeks ago under power of attorney authorization." I gripped the phone so tight I thought it might snap. "But it's my money." "I understand, ma'am," he said, tone tilting into something practiced and neutral. "But legally, your representative handles all financial decisions until the authorization is revoked. Can I revoke it now?" There was another pause. "I'm afraid that can only be done in person, with legal documentation. Do you have access to a notary?" I hung up before I could start crying. The walls of my room closed in. My hands went cold. I wasn't just being locked out of my house. I was being locked out of my life, my money, my autonomy, my choices. Everything I'd built, everything I'd saved, all of it now filtered through Darren and Melissa. They'd put me in this place like it was a gift. "Just rest," they said. "We'll handle everything." And they had. They handled it so well, I didn't own any of it anymore. I sat on the bed, still in my robe, staring at the useless bank card in my palm. That little piece of plastic used to mean freedom. Groceries, gas, Christmas gifts, a donation to the food bank when I felt generous, a birthday lunch with friends. It meant agency. Now it was just a reminder of how easily a signature, one shaky stroke of ink, can erase a lifetime of work. Janet came back from her walk and found me still there, the TV off, the lights dim. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at her. "They froze my bank account." Her jaw tightened. "Carol, it's time to stop hoping they're going to do the right thing." I nodded slowly. Hope was a beautiful thing, until it started making you blind. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. The discharge was scheduled for Thursday, but I asked the staff if I could go a day early. Just said I was feeling better. Strong enough to go home. They smiled. Encouraged me. "That's wonderful, Carol. We'll notify your family." "No need," I said quickly. "They'll be surprised." I packed my bags slowly. My cane went in first. Then the robe Melissa brought weeks ago, which I now saw for what it was. A gesture meant to look like care, but feel like control. I didn't take it. I called a cab myself. Janet hugged me at the curb. "Take your strength with you," she whispered. "Not just your suitcase." I nodded, but my stomach churned. The cab pulled into my street around 10:15 a.m. The houses looked smaller than I remembered. My legs ached just looking at the front steps. But I smiled anyway. This was home. Or so I thought. I climbed the steps, each one slower than the last, my heart thudding in my ears. I reached for my key, slid it into the door, and stopped. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. Jiggled it. Pushed harder. Nothing. I checked the key, thinking maybe I'd grabbed the wrong one from the center drawer. Nope. It was mine. That's when I saw it. My name, once printed neatly on the black mailbox, had been peeled off. A blank metal rectangle stared back at me, like I'd never lived there at all. Before I could knock, the door opened. Melissa stood there, perfectly done up in yoga pants and full makeup, holding a mug that probably said, "Live, laugh, love." She blinked like I was a solicitor. "Carol," she said flatly, "what are you doing here?" I forced a breath. "This is my house. Why are the locks changed?" She leaned against the doorframe with a smirk so small it almost passed for a twitch. "Because, technically, it's not your house anymore." "What? You signed the transfer, remember?" "For taxis, you said. Darren filed it right after. The deed's in his name now." "I never agreed to that," I said, but even as I spoke, I wasn't sure anymore. My hand had signed something. My body had been tired. My trust had been weaponized. Melissa stepped outside, letting the door click shut behind her. "Carol, this is awkward. You should have called. We weren't expecting you." My luggage sat on the porch where the driver had left it. My cane was resting against the railing. My neighbors, 2 of them, stood by their mailboxes, pretending not to watch. "You don't live here anymore," she said with fake softness. "We've taken over the upkeep. It's better this way." "You mean, while I was too sick to fight back?" Melissa tilted her head. "Let's not be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, louder than I intended. "I'm being robbed." The corners of her mouth twitched. "I'll give Darren a call. Maybe he can explain better." "No, I want to see the papers." "Now," she shrugged. "That's between you and your son." And with that, she turned and went back inside, the door locking behind her with a quiet, merciless click. I stood there, on the porch I built, beside the flowers I planted, with the weight of betrayal sitting heavier than any suitcase. They hadn't just taken my house. They'd taken my place in their world, and locked the door behind me. I didn't cry on the porch, not where they could see me. I dragged my suitcase down the steps, each bounce of the wheel sounding louder than my heartbeat. The cab driver was long gone. The neighbors had disappeared behind curtains. Even the wind felt colder on that side of the street. I texted Beverly, "Are you home? I need a place to land, just for a bit." Her reply came within seconds. "Yes, come now, front door's open." Beverly and I had met at a quilting class 15 years ago. I barely sew now, but she still makes blankets for shelters. We weren't best friends, not the kind that exchange daily texts or go on cruises. But she was solid, real, the kind of woman who keeps her word and bakes without measuring. When she opened her front door and saw me standing there, her eyes went wide with concern. "Oh, honey," that's all she said. And that was enough. She didn't ask why I was holding a suitcase. She didn't ask where Darren or Melissa were. She just took the bag from my hand and led me inside. "I made soup," she said, as if this were an ordinary Tuesday. We sat at her kitchen table, yellow-checked curtains framing the view of her modest backyard, where 2 squirrels were fighting over something invisible. I told her everything. Every moment, every silence, every paper I'd signed when I shouldn't have. The kitchen photo, the frozen bank account, the locks, Melissa's smirk. My voice barely wavered until the last part. "I trusted him," I whispered, gripping the spoon so hard it left a dent in my fingers. I trusted them. Beverly didn't flinch. She didn't say, "I told you so," though she could have. She'd never liked Melissa, always calling her all angles and ambition. Instead, she said, "You're not the first." I looked up. She poured more tea. "My cousin Margaret?" Her daughter put her in assisted living and sold the house 2 months later. Said it was for long-term comfort. Took everything but her Bible. I stared into my mug. What am I supposed to do now? "You fight," she said gently, but smart. "You don't storm in with a bat. You go legal. And you go quiet." "I don't have the money for—" "Yes, you do," Beverly cut in. "You just need someone who knows how to untangle messes like this." She opened her old recipe box, slipped out a card with a name and number scrawled in blue pen. "Call them tomorrow. Legal aid. Specializes in elder abuse. Friend of mine got her estate back after her nephew borrowed her house." I took the card. my hands still shaking. "They messed with the wrong woman," Beverly said, and her voice was steady like stone. "You've built more in your life than they'll ever touch." That night, I slept in Beverly's spare room, under a quilt she'd made herself, stitched from pieces of old flannel shirts and cotton dresses. Nothing fancy, just strong, like her, like I used to be, like I would be again. The next morning, I called the number Beverly gave me. "Senior Legal Resources Center," a calm voice answered. "This is Linda." I didn't know where to start. How do you explain that your own child has taken everything you own? I think my son and his wife tricked me into signing over my house," I said finally. "And now I can't access my bank account. They changed the locks. I don't even have a house key anymore." There was a long pause, but not the kind that feels cold. "Let's get you some help," Linda said gently. "Are you safe where you are right now?" "Yes," I replied, staying with a friend. "Okay. First, we'll need to document everything you can remember, every paper you signed, any emails or texts, bank communications, mail. Anything that proves your intention versus what they did. That part wasn't hard, because I kept things. All my life, I saved copies, filed things by month and year. I had printouts in the drawer Melissa never bothered to check. And I had an old email thread where Darren reassured me, "We're just managing things temporarily. You'll always have control, Mom." I dug through my luggage that afternoon. In one envelope, I found a scanned copy of the Power of Attorney form. I had taken a picture of it before mailing it to Darren weeks ago, back when I still believed we were all on the same side. It was labeled Temporary Power of Attorney for medical duration only. Linda was thrilled. That's our opening. If they use this to make permanent changes, like transferring property titles or closing your financial access, we can challenge that. It felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in weeks. She emailed me a checklist: property records, deed filings, bank statements. Beverly helped me print them all out at the library. We stayed up that night going through every folder, every receipt, every email trail Melissa had smugly left behind. They hadn't been careful. They thought I wouldn't look, wouldn't fight. The worst part was reading my own words. Texts I'd sent asking when I could come home, messages that were met with silence or one-word replies. I saw how slowly they pulled away, step by step, while I lay in that facility thinking they were just busy. But I documented all of it, each ignored message, each withdrawal. The day the deed changed names, the same week I'd been too weak to walk alone to the bathroom. Linda called again after reviewing my documents. "This isn't just unethical," she said. "It's potentially criminal." I felt numb. But under that numbness, something new was stirring, like steel beneath the skin. "They used my trust," I said quietly. "They turned it into a weapon." "Well," Linda replied, "now we'll turn the truth into one. We didn't tell Darren or Melissa anything. Not when the revocation papers were filed. Not when Linda sent formal requests to the county office for the deed change records. Not when the bank finally reinstated my access after weeks of back and forth and a legal affidavit proving my mental competence. Every move was quiet, deliberate, no warnings, no confrontations. Not yet. Melissa was still posting house updates online. "Our dream home is coming together," she wrote, with a picture of her painting the upstairs hallway, the one where I used to hang Darren's kindergarten art. And Darren? He didn't call. Not once. I wondered if he thought I'd just vanish, fade into some distant memory, tucked away in a facility while they made their lives brighter, shinier, richer, on my back. But I wasn't gone. I was watching, recording, reclaiming. Linda arranged a forensic review of my account activity during the time Darren held power of attorney. The report was damning. Nearly $38,000 in home improvements, thousands spent on Melissa's business expenses, even a $2,400 charge to a design boutique for custom drapes. I didn't cry. I felt nothing, really. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the grief had already passed. This was the stage after morning, where all that remained was clarity and resolve. "You've got a solid case," Linda said one afternoon, pushing a thick file across the desk. "And we have precedent: elder abuse, misuse of power of attorney, and fraudulent property transfer. So what's next?" She didn't smile, but her eyes narrowed like someone who's been waiting to strike. "We file for an injunction to freeze the house. No further alterations, no sale, no movement, and then we serve them." The word serve felt like thunder in my ears. I nodded slowly. "I don't want revenge," I said. Linda's expression didn't change. "You want your life back." "Exactly." Melissa and Darren thought silence meant surrender. But silence was just the waiting room before the storm. And I was done waiting. The courthouse steps were colder than I remembered. Linda met me outside with a file tucked under her arm and a sheriff's deputy in tow. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, gripping my cane tighter. The injunction had been granted that morning, temporary but powerful. The house was frozen, no sales, no transfers, no renovations, and most importantly, no right to exclude me from it anymore. We drove straight there. I sat in the back seat of Linda's car while the deputy followed in his cruiser. My heart wasn't pounding. It was still, focused, like the quiet you feel just before lightning strikes. They didn't see us coming. Melissa answered the door, barefoot, holding a mug that read, "Boss Lady." She looked surprised at the sight of the badge, and even more so when I stepped onto the porch behind him. Her lips parted, then flattened. "Well," she said, folding her arms, "this is a surprise." "No," I replied. "This is a reckoning." Linda handed the deputy the papers, and he gave Melissa the formal line. "By court order, you are hereby instructed to cease all alterations and vacate the premises if requested by the rightful owner pending investigation. Property, title, and financial actions are under legal dispute." Melissa's face turned white, then blotchy red. "What are you talking about? She signed everything over." I stepped forward. "A temporary power of attorney for medical reasons, which you exploited." She turned toward the house. "Darren!" she shrieked. He appeared in the hallway, holding his phone like he'd just been texting his way through the end of our relationship. He looked at me, then at the deputy, then at Linda. And he said nothing, just stared. I met his eyes. I waited for some flicker of shame, regret, anything human. It never came. Melissa turned to him. "Say something." But Darren stayed quiet, frozen in that doorway, watching the story he wrote unravel. Linda cleared her throat. "We advise you seek your own counsel. You'll be served the full complaint tomorrow morning." Melissa was still yelling as we walked away, cursing, threatening, spitting excuses into the wind. But Darren didn't move, didn't call my name, didn't say sorry. And I realized he wasn't silent out of shock. He was silent because he knew. He'd known all along what he was doing. And now, finally, so did I. The courthouse wasn't dramatic like in movies. No gasps, no shouting, just beige walls, a tired judge, and the faint buzz of a broken light overhead. Melissa wore a tight black dress, all fake grief and tighter heels. Darren wore a suit I didn't recognize. He didn't look at me once. They brought a lawyer. Expensive, from the way she tossed her hair and crossed her legs like she owned the room. They tried to play it clean. She's elderly. She was ill. She doesn't recall giving consent. That was their angle. Melissa even cried. She wanted us to manage things. She said it would be easier. She was grateful at the time. We only did what she asked. Linda stood calmly, binder in hand. She didn't raise her voice once. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit the original document, temporary medical power of attorney, with a clearly defined expiration clause. Additionally, attached are email correspondences showing no consent to permanent transfer, as well as financial records displaying unauthorized spending from the plaintiff's accounts while she was in recovery." She laid the paper trail like bricks, one after another, steady, cold. I didn't look at Darren during any of it. Not when they showed the deed change dated 3 days after my stroke. Not when they read aloud Melissa's texts. "We'll sell the furniture next. She won't need it where she's going." I sat still, hands folded, face calm. Quiet doesn't mean weak, Melissa finally snapped when they introduced the bank statements. She gave us permission. She didn't even care about that stuff. The judge lifted a brow. Is that your legal defense, Mrs. Keene? That she didn't care about her home and finances? Melissa's mouth opened, then shut. Darren still hadn't said a word. Linda rested her hand lightly on my shoulder as she stood to close. What's most disturbing, Your Honor, is not just the betrayal. It's the strategy. They waited for weakness. They used proximity as permission. They exploited her trust. The judge flipped through the papers one last time. Then he looked up. Deed transfer revoked. All financial control returned to Ms. Keene. The court finds misuse of power of attorney and temporary guardianship for personal gain. Melissa gasped like someone had slapped her. Darren just stood, still silent, still watching it all burn. They always say the moment you win in court should feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Relief, yes, but nothing joyful. Just empty lungs and tired muscles. Melissa sobbed at the defense table. Real tears now, not for me, for the loss of what she thought she owned. She clutched her purse like it could anchor her to something solid. But Darren, he didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't argue. When the judge finished reading the decision, he just stood, straightened his tie, and walked out. Not one glance in my direction, no apology, no excuse, not even shame. I watched his back as he left the courtroom, shoulders squared, steps even, like it was just another Thursday, like he hadn't just lost his mother, his home, and the last shreds of his integrity. Melissa chased after him, heels echoing down the corridor. I stayed seated for a moment longer. My cane rested against the bench beside me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to grip it just to feel steady. Linda turned to me. You did it. No, I said. They did. She smiled, tired. Either way, you have your house back. My house. I repeated it in my head as we walked toward the parking lot. Not because I needed to remember it, but because I needed to feel it. Own it again. The court clerk handed me the certified judgment. At the bottom, beneath the legal jargon and formal stamps, was my name. My full name. Spelled exactly right. They'd tried to erase me. But there I was, still standing, still me. Outside, the air was warm. Cars passed without knowing the war that had just ended inside those walls. Linda offered to walk me to my car, but I shook my head. I'll take it slow. I stood for a moment by the courthouse doors, letting the sun touch my face. No parade, no applause. Just sunlight, and silence, and finally, peace.